The lights in the great council hall dimmed as Ambassador Zethkara entered through the massive doors. His blue skin seemed to glow in the soft light, and his forearms moved with practiced grace as he took his place among the other delegates. The hall was huge, bigger than most cities, with seats arranged in perfect circles around a central platform. Today, 12 different species had gathered here, and each one looked worried. Supreme Chancellor Morvik stood at the center, his tall frame casting long shadows across the polished floor. He was old, even by his people's standards, and had seen many wars and many peace treaties, but today was different. Today they had discovered something that made even the bravest warriors feel afraid. The Nexari delegate pulsed with nervous yellow light, her crystalline body reflecting the worry that filled the room. She had traveled from the far reaches of the galaxy to be here, leaving behind her peaceful world of singing crystals and floating cities. Beside her sat Commander Thekmur of the Hegemony, his massive form taking up 3 regular seats. His people were known for their strength and their love of battle, but even he seemed uneasy. "My fellow beings," Chancellor Morvak began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "We are here because our scouts have found something new. Something that our scientists cannot explain and our generals cannot understand." He pressed a button on the platform and a hologram appeared in the air above them. It showed a small blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The planet looked peaceful enough, with white clouds swirling over its surface and 2 small moons circling around it. But the delegates knew better than to judge by appearances. "This is the 3rd planet in a system our explorers have designated as Sector 7 Alpha," the Chancellor continued. "The beings who live there call it Earth. At first, our scouts thought it was just another primitive world, not worth our attention. They were wrong." The hologram changed, showing images that made several delegates gasp. Cities covered the planet's surface, but they were unlike any cities the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the careful, planned structures that civilized species built, these cities seemed to grow wild, reaching up toward the sky with no pattern or order. Roads twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, and the buildings came in every shape and size. "The inhabitants call themselves humans," Morvik said, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a threat. "They have only recently developed space travel, but they are already spreading to other worlds in their system. Our behavioral analysts have studied them for 3 cycles now, and their reports are disturbing." Ambassador Zethkara leaned forward in his seat. His people had conquered 47 worlds, and he thought he understood all the different ways intelligent life could develop. But the images on the hologram showed something new, something that didn't fit any of the categories in their textbooks. The Chancellor pressed another button and recordings began to play. The delegates heard sounds they had never experienced before, music that seemed to have no rules, voices raised in anger and joy and sadness all at the same time, and underneath it all, something that made their skin crawl. It was the sound of beings who refused to be quiet, who would not accept their place in the natural order of things. "They fight constantly," Morvik explained. "Not for resources or territory, though they do that too. They fight for ideas. They fight for concepts that have no physical form. They call these things freedom and justice and rights, and they will die for them as easily as they would die for food or water." The Nexari delegate's light turned from yellow to deep red, a sign of extreme distress among her people. Her species had given up the concept of individual wants long ago, choosing instead to live in perfect harmony with each other and with nature. The idea of beings who would fight and die for abstract concepts was like a nightmare to her. "There's more," the Chancellor said, and his voice grew even more serious. "They do not seem to understand the concept of surrender. When faced with impossible odds, when any reasonable being would accept defeat and seek the best terms possible, they simply fight harder. Our analysts believe this may be a form of mental illness that affects their entire species." Commander Thekmur spoke up, his deep voice rumbling through the hall. "What weapons do they possess? If they are as dangerous as you suggest, we must know how to defend ourselves." The hologram changed again, showing human weapons and vehicles. They looked primitive compared to galactic technology, but there was something unsettling about them. They were built not for efficiency or elegance, but for one purpose only: to cause as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time. Their technology is crude but effective, Morvik replied. But that is not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is their willingness to use it, regardless of the cost to themselves. They have weapons that can destroy entire cities, and they have used them on their own planet against their own species. The delegates sat in shocked silence. The idea of a species turning such destructive power against itself was almost impossible to understand. In the galaxy, wars were fought according to ancient rules and customs. Civilians were protected, cities were preserved, and surrender was always accepted when properly offered. The idea of total warfare, of conflict without limits or mercy, belonged to the dark ages of galactic history. "We must decide what to do about this threat," the Chancellor continued. "Do we make contact with these humans? Do we try to guide them toward civilization? Or do we quarantine their system and hope they destroy themselves before they can spread beyond their borders?" Ambassador Zethkara stood slowly, his forearms moving in the ritual gesture of formal speech. "With respect, Chancellor, I believe we may be overreacting. Every species goes through a violent phase before reaching true civilization. Perhaps these humans just need time to mature." But even as he spoke the words, Zethkara felt doubt creeping into his mind. The images from Earth showed not a species in transition, but one that seemed to thrive on chaos and conflict. These humans appeared to grow stronger when faced with adversity, more united when threatened with destruction. It was as if they had evolved not to seek peace and order, but to create and survive in conditions that would break any other intelligent race. The debate that followed would last for days, but none of the delegates could have imagined that their decision was already being made for them. Far away, in the depths of space, a small human ship was about to encounter something that would change the fate of both Earth and the galaxy forever. The age of human isolation was ending, and the age of galactic uncertainty was about to begin. Commander Jake Bennett stood on the bridge of the Columbia, watching the stars through the main view screen and thinking about home. The ship was small by military standards, just big enough for his crew of 30 and their equipment, but it was the most advanced vessel Earth had ever built. The faster-than-light drive hummed quietly in the background, a sound that still amazed him even after 6 months in space. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from her communications console, brushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes. She had been monitoring radio signals from Earth, staying connected to the world they had left behind 3 weeks ago. The messages were mostly routine updates on the Mars colonies, progress reports from the moon bases, and the usual mix of news that made up daily life on Earth. "Still nothing from the deep space telescopes," Amy reported. "Whatever those energy readings were, they're not showing up on any of our equipment." Jake nodded but kept his attention on the view screen. They were further from Earth than any human had ever traveled, following up on strange signals that Earth's most powerful telescopes had detected in this region of space. The signals didn't match anything in their databases, but they seemed artificial, as if created by some kind of technology. Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan emerged from the engine room, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag he was older than. The rest of the crew, a veteran of the Mars missions who had volunteered for this deep space assignment because he couldn't resist the chance to test humanity's newest technology in unknown territory. "The drive is running smooth," Pete said, settling into his chair at the engineering station. "But I'm getting some odd readings from the sensors. It's like there's something out there, just at the edge of our detection range." Jake felt a familiar tingle of excitement and worry. This was what exploration was all about, the moment when you realized you might be about to discover something completely new. But it was also the moment when you realized that something new might discover you first. "Keep monitoring," he ordered. "If there's something out here, I want to know about it before it knows about us." But even as he spoke, Jake knew they were already too late. The sensors suddenly came alive with activity, showing energy signatures unlike anything in their computer files. The view screen filled with light as shapes appeared around them, ships that seemed to bend space itself as they moved. The alien vessels were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They looked like they had been grown rather than built, with smooth curves and flowing lines that seemed to shift and change even as Jake watched. Some were small and fast, darting around the Columbia like schools of metallic fish. Others were massive, their hulls stretching for miles in directions that hurt to look at directly. "We're surrounded," Amy said, her voice steady despite the fear Jake could hear underneath. 12 ships, no ... 15. No, I can't get an accurate count. They're using some kind of technology that's interfering with our sensors. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running or trying to hide, he stepped forward to the communications console and opened a channel on all frequencies. His voice was calm and professional, the same tone he would use to greet visitors at a space station. "This is Commander Jake Bennett of the Earth vessel Columbia. We come in peace, but we're prepared to defend ourselves if necessary." The response came immediately, not through their radio systems, but somehow directly into their minds. The voice was strange, speaking in perfect English but with an accent that belonged to no human culture. Behind the words, Jake could sense vast intelligence and something that might have been surprise. "You are the humans from the third planet. We have been watching you. You will come with us." It wasn't a request or a threat, just a simple statement of fact. But something in Jake's nature rebelled against being told what to do by strangers, no matter how advanced they might be. He had joined the military to protect Earth and its people, not to surrender at the first sign of superior force. "With respect, we'll need to know who you are and where you want to take us before we agree to anything," Jake replied. "We're explorers, not prisoners." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Through the view screen, Jake could see the alien ships, moving into new positions, but they made no hostile moves. Instead, they seemed to be studying the Columbia with the same curiosity that the humans were studying them. When the voice came again, it carried a note of something that might have been confusion. "You do not understand. We are the Galactic Council. All species must be evaluated and classified." "This is the law." "Whose law?" Jake asked. "We never agreed to any galactic law. We didn't even know you existed until today." Dr. Carl Martinez, the ship's medical officer, moved quietly to Jake's side. He was a thin man with kind eyes and steady hands, the sort of person who stayed calm in any crisis. He had treated injuries, ranging from radiation burns to broken bones during their journey, and Jake trusted his judgment completely. "Commander," Carl said quietly, "I'm reading some kind of scanning beam directed at our ship. They're studying us, taking measurements." "Of some kind?" Jake felt his jaw tighten. The idea of being examined like laboratory specimens didn't appeal to him, but he also knew they were vastly outnumbered and probably outgunned. Still, something deep in his human nature refused to simply submit to whatever these aliens had planned. "You're scanning us without permission," he said, directing his words toward the alien ships. "That's not very peaceful behavior." "We must understand what you are," the voice replied. "Your species shows patterns we have not encountered before. You must be properly classified so that you can take your place in galactic civilization." Sergeant Kelly Davis, the ship's security chief, stepped onto the bridge. She was a compact woman with short blonde hair and muscles that spoke of years of hard training. Her hand rested casually on her sidearm, not as a threat but as a reminder that humans were not completely helpless. "Sir," she said to Jake, "I've got the crew armed and ready. If these visitors want to board us, we can make it interesting for..." Jake almost smiled despite the situation. Kelly's response was so typically human faced with overwhelming odds. Her first instinct was to figure out how to fight back. But he also knew that starting a shooting war with advanced aliens would probably end badly for everyone involved. "Hold that thought, Sergeant," he said. "Let's see what they want first." The alien voice spoke again, and this time Jake could hear other voices in the background as if multiple beings were discussing the situation. You will be transported to our evaluation facility. This is standard procedure for all new species. You will not be harmed if you cooperate. And if we don't cooperate? Jake asked. The pause that followed was longer this time, as if the aliens had never been asked that question before. When the voice returned, it sounded genuinely puzzled. All species cooperate. It is the logical response to superior force. Why? Would you choose to resist when resistance is futile? Pete Sullivan looked up from his engineering console, where he had been monitoring the alien scanning beams. Commander, they're not just studying our technology. They're trying to understand how we think, how we make decisions. I think they're as confused by us as we are by them. Jake realized that Pete was right. These aliens expected humans to behave in predictable ways, to follow patterns that other species had established over thousands of years. They expected fear, submission, and acceptance of whatever fate the galaxy had decided for Earth. What they got instead was a species that asked questions, demanded explanations, and refused to accept authority simply because it claimed to be superior. We'll come with you, Jake said finally, but as guests, not prisoners. We'll cooperate with your evaluation, but we reserve the right to leave if we don't like what we hear. And we want to send a message to Earth, letting our people know what's happening. The silence that followed his words would be remembered by historians as the moment when the galaxy first encountered true human stubbornness. Jake Bennett, standing on the bridge of a tiny ship surrounded by forces beyond his comprehension, had just told the rulers of galactic civilization that humanity would cooperate on its own terms or not at all. The age of human independence had begun. Admiral Lisa Parker walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime with the confident stride of someone who had commanded fleets across half the galaxy. Her silver hair was pulled back in the regulation style of the Galactic Enforcement Division, and her uniform bore the insignia of countless successful campaigns against rebellious species. But today, for the first time in her long career, she felt uncertain about the outcome of her mission. The human specimens had arrived 3 days ago, transported from their primitive vessel to the most advanced evaluation facility in known space. The 30 beings now occupied a section of the station that had been designed to hold and study new species. But nothing about this assignment was going according to plan. Dr. Vexthara, the chief behavioral analyst, met Admiral Parker at the entrance to the observation deck. Her tentacles writhed with agitation, a clear sign of stress among her species. She had studied hundreds of different types of intelligent life during her career, categorizing them according to the established patterns that governed galactic civilization. Admiral, we have a problem, Dr. Vexthara said, her voice carrying the clicking sounds that marked her people's speech. These humans do not fit any known category. Every test we run, every analysis we perform, gives us results that contradict our fundamental understanding of how intelligent species develop. Admiral Parker looked through the transparent barrier at the humans below. They had been given comfortable quarters and access to educational materials about galactic civilization, but instead of showing gratitude or fear, they seemed to be studying their captors with the same intensity that the aliens were studying them. Dr. Carl Martinez sat at a desk in the common area, making notes on a tablet that had been provided for him. But Admiral Parker could see that he wasn't recording information about galactic technology or culture. Instead, he was documenting everything he could observe about his alien hosts, turning the evaluation process into a two-way exchange of information. What exactly is the problem? Admiral Parker asked. All species show some unique characteristics during initial evaluation. Dr. Vexthara activated a holographic display that showed the results of various psychological tests. The data was unlike anything Admiral Parker had seen before, with patterns that seemed to make no sense according to established behavioral science. Look at these results from our standard submission protocols, the doctor explained. When faced with superior force and offered a choice between comfort and resistance, 97% of all known species choose comfort within the first cycle. The humans have been here for 3 cycles, and 100% of them continue to choose resistance. Admiral Parker studied the data more carefully. The humans had been offered individual rewards for cooperation, threats for disobedience, and rational arguments about the benefits of joining galactic civilization. None of these approaches had produced the expected results. Commander Jake Bennett sat in what the aliens called a counseling session, facing a being whose appearance would have terrified most species. The counselor was tall and covered in scales, with eyes that glowed with inner fire and a voice that could compel obedience from almost any intelligent creature. But Jake simply listened politely and then asked questions that made the counselor visibly uncomfortable. "You say that joining galactic civilization will bring us peace and prosperity?" Jake said, his voice calm and reasonable. "But what if we prefer to make our own mistakes and find our own path? What if we don't want your version of peace and prosperity?" The counselor's scales shifted color, a sign of confusion among his people. In thousands of years of conducting these sessions, no being had ever suggested that galactic civilization might be imperfect or that independence might be preferable to security. "Your species is young and inexperienced," the counselor replied, falling back on standard responses. "You do not understand the dangers that exist in the galaxy. Without our protection and guidance, you will surely destroy yourselves." Jake leaned back in his chair, and Admiral Parker could see something in his expression that made her feel uneasy. It was the look of someone who had heard similar arguments before and found them unconvincing. "Maybe we will destroy ourselves," Jake said. "But that's our choice to make. We've been managing our own affairs for thousands of years without galactic supervision. We're not perfect, but we're still here, and we're still learning." In another part of the facility, Sergeant Kelly Davis was participating in what the aliens called a military aptitude assessment. She faced off against training robots that had been programmed with the combat techniques of a dozen different species, but instead of following the expected patterns of warfare, she kept improvising new tactics that the robots couldn't counter. The test supervisor, a being whose species had perfected the art of strategic warfare over millions of years, watched in growing amazement as Kelly systematically defeated opponents that should have been impossible for her to overcome. She didn't win through superior strength or speed, but through sheer stubbornness and a refusal to accept that any situation was hopeless. "How do you continue fighting when the odds are clearly against you?" the supervisor asked during a break. Between sessions, Kelly wiped sweat from her forehead and checked her equipment with the automatic precision of a trained soldier. "Because giving up isn't an option," she said simply. "If I'm going to lose, I'm going to make it cost them everything they've got." Dr. Vexthara pulled up another set of test results, these ones showing psychological profiles that defied explanation. "Look at their response to our standard cooperation incentives. We offered individual humans positions of authority over their fellows in exchange for compliance with our directives. Every single one of them refused." Admiral Parker found this particularly hard to believe. In her experience, every species had individuals who could be bought, threatened, or convinced to betray their own people for personal gain. It was one of the fundamental constants of intelligent behavior. "Everyone?" she asked. "Even when threatened with punishment?" "Especially when threatened with punishment," Dr. Vexthara replied. "The threats seem to make them more resistant. Not less. They appear to view suffering as acceptable if it maintains what they call their integrity." Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan was in the Technology Assessment Lab, examining galactic devices with the curiosity of someone who had spent his life figuring out how things worked. But instead of being impressed or intimidated by the advanced technology, he kept asking questions that made the evaluators uncomfortable. "This faster-than-light drive is impressive," he said, studying a holographic display of the propulsion system. "But it requires your people to give up individual decision-making to a central computer network. What happens if the network fails or makes a mistake?" The technician explaining the system paused, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "The network does not make mistakes. It has been perfected over millions of years and represents the collective wisdom of our entire species." Pete nodded thoughtfully, but Admiral Parker could see that he remained unconvinced. "Back home, we have a saying, 'To err is human.' We've learned that mistakes are part of learning, and learning is part of growing. If your network never makes mistakes, how does it learn new things? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the technician believed about the superiority of galactic civilization. The idea that mistakes might be valuable, that uncertainty might lead to growth, was completely foreign to species that had spent millions of years perfecting their systems and eliminating all possible sources of error. Admiral Parker reviewed the final psychological evaluation report with growing concern. The humans had been classified as ungovernable, a category that had never been used before in the history of galactic civilization. They showed no respect for established authority, no fear of superior force, and no willingness to accept their assigned place in the natural order of things. "What do you recommend?" she asked Dr. Vexthara. The behavioral analyst's tentacles writhed even more violently, a sign of extreme distress. "I don't know. Every protocol we have is based on the assumption that intelligent species eventually learn to value security over freedom, cooperation over independence, and peace over uncertainty. These humans seem to believe the opposite." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was in the communications center, trying to send a message back to Earth despite the sophisticated jamming systems that surrounded Nexus Prime. She had been working for hours, using techniques that no galactic civilization had ever encountered, and slowly making progress. The communications officer monitoring her work was a member of a species that had developed the most advanced information systems in the galaxy, but he found himself struggling to keep up with Amy's improvised methods and unconventional approaches to signal transmission. "Why do you persist when you know the message cannot reach its destination?" he asked. Amy looked up from her work, her fingers still moving across the control interface. "Because my people need to know what's happening to us. Because they're probably worried, and because giving up isn't in my nature." She paused for a moment, then added something that would be repeated in intelligence reports throughout the galaxy. "You can jam our signals and block our communications, but you can't stop us from trying." Supreme Justice Elena Voss stood at the window of her cabin aboard the Defiance, watching the stars stream past as Earth's newest and most advanced vessel made its way toward Nexus Prime. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent making difficult decisions. As head of Earth's diplomatic corps, she had negotiated treaties between nations and mediated conflicts that could have destroyed entire continents. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what lay ahead. The Defiance was unlike any ship humanity had ever built before. In the 3 months since the Columbia's crew had been taken by the aliens, Earth's greatest minds had worked around the clock to create a vessel that could stand among the stars as an equal. The ship was smaller than most galactic vessels, but it incorporated technology that made alien observers deeply uncomfortable, not because it was more advanced, but because it was designed around principles they didn't understand. Admiral Tony Chin stood beside Elena, studying the tactical displays that showed their escort fleet. 12 ships accompanied the Defiance, each one representing humanity's determination to meet the galaxy on their own terms. The fleet looked fragile compared to the massive dreadnoughts that patrolled galactic space, but Admiral Chen had designed them with one purpose in mind: to survive whatever the galaxy could throw at them and keep fighting. "The alien ships are maintaining their distance," reported Captain Ryan Foster from the bridge. He was a young officer who had volunteered for this mission despite knowing that it might be humanity's last chance to avoid a war they couldn't win. "They're escorting us to Nexus Prime as agreed, but they're not taking any chances." Elena nodded, understanding the aliens' caution. 3 months ago, they had been dealing with what they thought was a primitive species that could be easily controlled and integrated into galactic civilization. Now they were facing beings who had refused every attempt at classification and had demanded to negotiate as equals. The message Earth had sent to the Galactic Council was simple and direct. Humanity wanted their people back. They wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations, and they would not accept any restrictions on their development or movement that they had not agreed to themselves. The message had caused panic in some quarters of galactic government and angry demands for immediate military action in others. Lieutenant Danny Brooks, the Defiance's communications officer, looked up from his station with a puzzled expression. He was monitoring alien communications channels, trying to understand the political situation they were flying into. "Ma'am, I'm picking up some strange chatter from the alien fleets," he said. "They're talking about something called the Free Systems Alliance. It sounds like other species are starting to ask questions about galactic law and authority." Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. The idea that humanity's refusal to submit might inspire other species to question their own situation was encouraging. But it also meant that the stakes of this mission had grown far beyond Earth's borders. Admiral Chun studied the tactical reports that were coming in from Earth's deep space monitoring stations. The intelligence was fragmentary and hard to interpret, but it painted a picture of a galaxy in the early stages of political upheaval. "It looks like our little declaration of independence has caused more trouble than the aliens expected," he sighed. "Several species are requesting formal reviews of their classification status. Others are demanding representation in the Galactic Council. The whole system is starting to crack." The Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Nexus Prime system, and Elena got her first look at the political heart of galactic civilization. The space around the massive station was filled with ships from dozens of different species, but there was something different about the formation they were maintaining. Instead of the orderly patterns that usually characterize galactic military movements, the fleets seemed to be positioning themselves along factional lines. "We're being hailed by 3 different alien commanders," Captain Foster reported. "One claims to represent the Galactic Council. Another says he speaks for something called the Stability Coalition. And the third is identifying himself as a representative of the Free Systems Alliance." Elena took a deep breath and prepared to step onto a stage that was bigger than Earth had ever imagined. The simple act of refusing to be governed without consent was apparently more revolutionary than anyone had realized. "Put me through to all of them," she ordered. "It's time to find out what we've started." The main view screen split into 3 sections, showing the faces of alien beings who looked as different from each other as they did from humans. But despite their varied appearances, Elena could see that they all shared one thing in common: uncertainty about what came next. The first alien, a being whose species Elena recognized as one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders. "I am Admiral Keth Morin of the Council Fleet. You will follow my ships to the designated docking bay and submit to the standard diplomatic protocols." The second alien was smaller and more nervous, with features that seemed designed for hiding rather than confronting. "Please, human representative, do not listen to the radical elements. The galaxy has enjoyed millions of years of peace under Council guidance. Change will only bring chaos and suffering." But it was the third alien who caught Elena's attention. He looked tired, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time, but there was something in his eyes that reminded her of the human refugees she had worked with during Earth's own wars of independence. "Justice Voss," he said, using her title with careful respect, "I am Commander Veltar of the Free Systems Alliance. We have been waiting a long time for someone to speak the words you have spoken. My people stand ready to support Earth's right to self-determination." Elena realized that she was looking at the galaxy's first attempt to organize resistance to the established order in millions of years. The Free Systems Alliance might be small and untested, but it represented something that had been missing from galactic civilization for so long that most species had forgotten it ever existed: the idea that authority must be earned, not simply claimed. "Thank you, Commander Veltar," she said. "Earth is honored by your support, but we want to make something clear to all parties here. We're not seeking to overthrow galactic civilization or to impose our values on other species. We simply want to exist on our own terms and to extend the same courtesy to any other species that chooses to do the same." She paused, making sure that her words were being recorded and transmitted throughout the galactic communication networks. What she said next would be studied by historians for generations to come. We call this the Free Systems Alliance not because we want to fight the Galactic Council, but because we believe that true civilization comes from choice, not compulsion. Any species that wants to remain under Council authority is free to do so. But any species that wants to choose its own path should also be free to do so. The silence that followed Elena's words was broken by Admiral Kethmorin, whose voice carried the frustration of someone whose authority had been challenged for the first time in his career. You cannot simply declare yourself independent of galactic law, he said. The Council has maintained peace and order for millions of years. Without central authority, the galaxy will descend into chaos and war. Elena had heard similar arguments during Earth's own history, when established powers had claimed that change would bring only disaster. She had learned that those who benefited most from the existing system were always the ones most afraid of change. Admiral, with respect, we're not declaring ourselves independent of galactic law, she replied. We're declaring that we never agreed to that law in the first place. You can't govern people who haven't consented to be governed. That's not law. That's tyranny. Commander Veltar's image showed what might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with his alien features. The human speaks truth. My people were conquered by the Council 3,000 years ago. We were told it was for our own good, for the sake of galactic peace. But we never agreed to give up our right to make our own decisions. The representative of the Stability Coalition, whose name Elena learned was Minister Thexara, spoke with the desperation of someone who could see their entire worldview crumbling. But the chaos, the wars, the suffering that will come if the old order breaks down, he pleaded. Surely stability and peace are worth some sacrifice of individual freedom. Elena looked at the alien's frightened face and felt a moment of genuine sympathy. She understood his fear because she had seen the same terror in the eyes of people throughout Earth's history who had been asked to choose between security and liberty. Minister Thexara, I understand your concerns, she said gently. But we've learned something on Earth that I think applies to the galaxy as well. Freedom isn't the opposite of security, it's the foundation of real security. People who are free to choose their own path are less likely to rebel against it, even when that path is difficult. Admiral Chun moved to Elena's side, and his presence reminded everyone watching that Earth had not come to negotiate from a position of weakness. The 12 ships of the escort. The war began not with explosions or battle cries, but with a single word spoken by President Michelle Turner from the steps of the White House. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who looked like someone's grandmother rather than the leader of a species that had just declared its independence from galactic civilization. But when she spoke that one word into the microphones that would carry her voice across the galaxy, she changed everything. No, that was all she said at first, standing in the morning sunlight while reporters and cameras captured every moment. For history. Behind her, the flags of Earth's nations flew alongside the new banner of the Terran Republic, a simple design showing a blue and green world surrounded by stars. But the power of that single word carried more weight than all the weapons in Earth's arsenal. The Galactic Council has demanded that we submit to their authority, that we accept their classification of humanity as a restricted species requiring constant supervision. President Turner continued, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of absolute determination. Our answer is no. We were not consulted when these laws were made. We did not consent to be governed by beings we had never met. We reject any authority that claims the right to rule us without our permission. Admiral Scott Williams stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Constitution, watching as the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled, moved into position at the edge of the solar system. 300 ships spread out across millions of miles of space, each one representing humanity's refusal to accept a fate chosen for them by others. The fleet looked tiny compared to the galactic armada approaching from deep space, but Scott had learned something during his years of military service. The size of the force mattered less than the will to use it. Admiral, we're getting sensor readings on the approaching fleet, reported Captain Helen Morris from her position at the tactical station. 2,000 ships, maybe more. They're using technology we don't fully understand, and they're moving in formation patterns we've never seen before. Scott nodded but felt no fear. He had studied the reports from Jake Bennett and the other members of the Columbia's crew, and he understood something that the aliens apparently didn't. This wasn't a battle between different technologies or superior numbers. This was a conflict between two completely different ideas about what it meant to be alive and free in the universe. "All ships, this is Admiral Williams," he said into the communication system that linked every vessel in the fleet. "Remember why we're here. We're not fighting to conquer or to destroy. We're fighting for the right to exist as free beings, to make our own choices, and to face the consequences of those choices ourselves. That's not just worth fighting for, it's the only thing worth fighting for." On Earth, the preparations for war took forms that would have seemed impossible to galactic civilization. Instead of mass evacuations and surrender negotiations, the planet's cities filled with volunteers who wanted to help defend their world. Factories retooled to produce weapons and supplies, while scientists worked around the clock to develop new technologies based on captured alien equipment. Major Kevin Thompson walked through the streets of New York, marveling at the transformation that had taken place in just a few weeks. Every building had been turned into a potential fortress, every street into a maze of defensive positions. But more important than the physical preparations was the attitude of the people he saw everywhere he looked. They weren't afraid. That was what struck him most forcefully as he watched civilians helping soldiers prepare defensive positions and children playing games that taught them how to hide from alien scanners. The people of Earth had been told that they faced an enemy with superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but instead of despair, they showed a stubborn determination that reminded Kevin of his own ancestors who had faced impossible odds, and somehow found a way to win. "Major Thompson," called out Dr. Lisa Carter, one of the scientists working on Earth's new defensive systems. She was a young woman with bright eyes and an enthusiasm for her work that seemed out of place in the middle of a war zone. "We finished the modifications to the planetary defense grid. It's not going to stop their big ships, but it should make them think twice about getting too close to populated areas." Kevin looked at the technical specifications she handed him and felt a surge of pride in his species. The defensive grid was based on captured alien technology, but modified in ways that reflected humanity's unique approach to warfare. Instead of trying to match the aliens' superior firepower, the system was designed to turn Earth itself into a weapon that would make conquest too expensive to be worthwhile. "How many of their ships can we take down?" Kevin asked. Lisa shrugged, but her expression remained confident. "I don't know, but I guarantee that every one they lose is going to cost them more than they expect. We've learned something from studying their technology. They're used to fighting opponents who follow the same rules they do. We're going to show them what happens when someone breaks all the rules." In space, the two fleets met at a point halfway between Earth and Jupiter, where the ancient planet's massive gravity would affect the battle in ways that neither side could fully predict. Admiral Williams watched the alien formation approach and felt a moment of admiration for their discipline and precision. Every ship moved in perfect coordination with every other ship, creating patterns of devastating beauty that spoke of millions of years of military evolution. But beauty and precision weren't everything in war, and the aliens were about to learn why humanity had survived on a world where everything seemed designed to kill them. "All ships, engage at will," Admiral Williams ordered, and the battle for Earth's independence began. The human fleet didn't fight like any enemy the galactic forces had ever encountered. Instead of maintaining formations and following established tactical doctrine, each ship seemed to operate independently while somehow remaining perfectly coordinated with the others. Commander Nicole Hayes of the destroyer Phoenix led her squadron in an attack that should have been suicidal, using her ships as missiles to punch through the alien defensive screens. "Phoenix to all ships," Nicole transmitted as her vessel bore down on a massive alien dreadnought. "Remember, we're not trying to win a traditional battle. We're trying to show them that conquering us will cost more than leaving us alone. Make every shot count, and make every loss hurt them more than it hurts us. Her ship struck the alien dreadnought's bridge at nearly the speed of light, and the explosion that followed lit up space for millions of miles around. But even as the Phoenix died, its sacrifice had crippled one of the enemy's most powerful vessels and opened a gap in their formation that other human ships quickly exploited. The battle raged for hours, with human ships using tactics that the aliens had never seen before. Instead of trying to preserve their forces, the human commanders seemed willing to sacrifice everything if it meant inflicting damage on their enemies. But it wasn't the wasteful sacrifice of desperation, it was the calculated sacrifice of people who understood that some things were more important than survival on the surface of Earth. The war took different forms that were even more confusing to the galactic forces. When alien troops landed in major cities, they expected to face organized military resistance that could be defeated through superior firepower and technology. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Sergeant Kelly Davis, who had been returned to Earth as part of the diplomatic exchange, led resistance operations that turned entire city blocks into killing zones for alien forces. But the most effective resistance came from civilians who had never been soldiers, people who fought not because they had been ordered to, but because the alternative was accepting a life they considered unacceptable. The aliens don't understand. U.S., Kelly explained to a group of resistance fighters who had gathered in the ruins of what used to be a shopping center. They think war is about winning and losing, about who has the better weapons and the superior strategy. But for us, this isn't about winning. It's about refusing to be defeated, and there's a difference. The war continued for 3 years, but it wasn't the kind of war that galactic civilization understood. The human forces lost more battles than they won, suffered casualties that should have broken their will to fight, and faced odds that should have convinced them to surrender. But instead of growing weaker, they seemed to grow stronger with every defeat, more united with every loss, and more determined with every setback. The end came not because one side destroyed the other, but because the galactic forces finally understood what they were really fighting against. They weren't fighting a species that could be conquered or controlled. They were fighting an idea that was spreading throughout the galaxy like a virus, infecting other species with the dangerous notion that freedom was worth any price. Supreme. Chancellor Morvick stood before the Galactic Council for the last time, his ancient frame bent with exhaustion and defeat. Around him, the representatives of dozens of species waited to hear words that would end an age and begin another. "Fellow beings," he said, his voice carrying the weight of millions of years of galactic history, "we have learned something.